My husband put his phone on speaker, dialed my mother, and said, "Come pick up your useless daughter. I'm kicking her out, and she's leaving with nothing." He laughed, thinking he'd stripped away my dignity, my home, and my future after 5 years of marriage. He thought I was just a quiet, penniless orphan he'd saved from humble beginnings. He had no idea my mother had been waiting for this exact phone call. Less than 20 minutes later, the quiet suburban street shook as 6 pitch-black SUVs pulled into the driveway, blocking his sports car. Men in tailored suits stepped out, but it was the woman in the lead vehicle that made my husband's face turn completely ghost white. He thought he was throwing away trash. He was about to realize he'd just declared war on a multi-billion-dollar empire. My name is Clara, and at 31 years old, I thought I was living the quiet life I had chosen for myself. For 5 years, I was the devoted, invisible wife standing behind Julian, doing everything I could to make his world run smoothly. I gave up my own career trajectory, managed our household, and cooked every meal, all while keeping a profound secret about where I actually came from. I wanted a life built on true partnership, not status or money. But success has an ugly way of twisting weak men into monsters. The shift happened the moment Julian's tech startup secured its second round of major venture capital funding. Suddenly, the humble man I married disappeared, replaced by someone obsessed with high society validation, country club memberships, and expensive wristwatches. He began staying out late, openly criticizing the way I dressed, and dropping subtle hints that I no longer fit the image he was trying to project to his wealthy investors. His mother, a bitter woman who lived off his newly inflated ego, fed into every bit of it, constantly reminding him that he had outgrown his plain, humble wife. The boiling point arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I came home from grocery shopping to find my clothes packed into mismatched suitcases, sitting haphazardly near the front entrance. Julian was standing in his home office, sipping scotch, while his mother sat on the sofa with a smirk that told me everything. Before I could even ask what was happening, Julian tossed a set of divorce papers onto the dining table. He didn't offer a conversation or an apology, just a cold, rehearsed speech about how I was dead weight, an anchor holding back his true potential, and how he needed a partner who actually matched his rising status. When I stood my ground and refused to let him reduce 5 years of my life to a line on a legal document, his face darkened. He grabbed his phone, tapped the screen, and placed it on speaker right in the middle of the kitchen counter. He dialed my mother, Eleanor, a woman he had spent years looking down upon, assuming she was nothing more than a broke, lonely widow living in a forgotten rural town. "Come pick up your useless daughter," Julian barked into the speaker, his voice dripping with arrogance as he glanced at his mother, who chuckled in the background. "I'm kicking her out today, and she's leaving with nothing. I'm done wasting my money on someone who brings zero value to my life." He hung up before she could even reply, tossing his phone onto the couch with a smug grin. He thought he had just delivered the ultimate humiliation, stripping away my pride and throwing me out like garbage. He genuinely believed I was an orphan with nowhere to turn. He had no idea that my silence over the last 5 years wasn't out of weakness, but protection, and that he had just summoned the one person capable of tearing his entire world down to the ground. Julian and his mother stood on the porch, watching me with smug satisfaction as the light rain began to slick the driveway. "You have 15 minutes to get your boxes off my property," Julian sneered, crossing his arms. His mother chimed in with a sharp, mocking laugh. "It's for the best, Clara. A girl from your background should have known better than to reach above her station." I didn't utter a single word. I simply stood by my suitcases, watching the timer on my watch tick down. I knew my mother, and I knew that when Eleanor Vance moves, she moves with absolute precision. At exactly 19 minutes, the quiet suburban quiet of our gated neighborhood was shattered by the deep rumble of multiple heavy engines. Julian frowned, looking toward the end of the street, expecting perhaps a battered pickup truck or a yellow taxi. Instead, the street seemed to vibrate as 6 pitch-black, full-sized SUVs turned the corner in tight, flawless formation. Every single vehicle had dark, pitch-black tinted windows and government-grade exterior details. Julian's smug expression flickered for a fraction of a second, replaced by confusion as the fleet pulled up directly in front of our house, completely blocking his prized European sports car in the driveway. The lead SUV came to a smooth stop, followed instantly by the synchronized sound of 4 doors opening across the vehicles. 8 tall men in immaculate charcoal suits stepped out, wearing earpieces and positioning themselves with the disciplined efficiency of a high-level private security detail. Julian took an uneasy step back on the porch, his voice cracking slightly. What is this? Who authorized these cars on private property? The rear door of the central SUV opened. A sleek, custom-tailored umbrella was opened by a security agent, and out stepped my mother, Eleanor. She didn't look like the quiet, humble woman Julian had spent 5 years ignoring. She wore an immaculate, bespoke Italian trench coat, her diamond brooch glinting even under the gray sky. Flanking her were 2 men carrying leather briefcases, top-tier corporate litigation attorneys whose faces Julian recognized instantly from the covers of national financial magazines. Julian's mother gasped, clutching her pearls in sudden horror, while Julian's jaw dropped so low he looked foolish. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Eleanor didn't even glance at him as she walked up the stone pathway, her heels clicking with deliberate authority against the pavement. She walked straight up to me, cupped my face in her hands, and kissed my cheek. "You kept your promise to give him a chance, darling," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Now it's my turn." She turned slowly to face Julian, her eyes turning into cold steel. "Julian," Eleanor said smoothly, her tone carrying the terrifying calm of absolute power. "You called me to pick up my useless daughter. But I believe you forgot to check who actually owns the company that writes your checks. I am Eleanor Vance, chairwoman of Vanguard Global Holdings. And you just made the single biggest mistake of your miserable life." Julian stared at my mother, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "The Vanguard Global?" he stammered, the color completely drained from his face. "No, that's impossible. Vanguard is a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm based in New York. You're just Clara's mother." "I am the majority shareholder of Vanguard Global," Eleanor replied coldly, stepping past him into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Her security detail took positions at the front door, effectively sealing off the house. "And 5 years ago, when my daughter insisted on marrying you, she asked me for one thing, to let you build your career on your own merits, without the influence of my family's fortune. So, I watched from the shadows." Julian turned his desperate gaze to me, his arrogance entirely replaced by rising panic. "Clara, what is she talking about? You told me your parents were middle class." "I told you my family valued hard work over titles," I said, stepping into the hallway alongside my mother. "You never asked about the details, Julian. You were too busy making assumptions based on how quietly I lived." One of Eleanor's lead attorneys stepped forward, unzipping a sleek leather portfolio and pulling out a stack of binding legal notices. "5 years ago, Mr. Vance," the attorney began in a crisp, professional tone, "you insisted on drafting a strict prenuptial agreement to protect what you called your personal enterprise. What you failed to realize is that our firm added standard counterclauses regarding proxy investments, non-disclosure, and ethical conduct." Julian's mother let out a high-pitched gasp, clutching Julian's arm. "Julian, do something. Call your lawyer." "His lawyer can't save him," Eleanor said, taking a thick white binder from her attorney and holding it right in front of Julian's face. "6 months ago, your startup needed $5 million to survive its Series B funding. You thought an anonymous angel investor named Apex Capital saved you. What you didn't know is that Apex Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Global. I funded your company, Julian. Every piece of equipment in your office, every employee salary, even the lease on the building you brag about, it was all paid for with my money." Julian stumbled back against the console table, knocking over a decorative vase that shattered on the hardwood floor. You can't just take it away. We have contracts. And you breached every single one of them," the attorney interjected calmly. "Under Clause 14 of the Apex Capital Agreement, any personal misconduct, fraudulent misrepresentation, or unethical behavior by the founding CEO gives Vanguard the immediate right to trigger a full financial audit and demand immediate repayment of all capital loans. Eleanor leaned in close, her eyes fixed on Julian with lethal intensity. You called my daughter useless, Julian. You threw her out on the street because you thought she had no power. Now, you're about to find out what happens when the real power decides to collect its debt. The room went completely quiet, save for the sudden, violent vibration of Julian's phone against the glass coffee table. He stared down at the screen, his expression twisting into sheer horror as the caller ID displayed the name of his company's lead board member and primary independent director. With trembling hands, Julian answered the call, putting it on speaker in a desperate attempt to show control. Before he could speak, a furious voice boomed through the speaker, echoing across the foyer. Julian, what the hell is going on? I just received a formal notice from Vanguard Global's legal team. They've frozen our primary operating accounts, pulled our credit lines, and issued a full emergency audit. Julian gasped, his eyes darting frantically between my mother and her lead attorney. Wait, no. Mr. Davis, listen to me. There's been a massive misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? The director barked, cutting him off instantly. They provided documentation showing material breach of contract and personal misconduct. The board is convening an emergency session in 10 minutes. Effective immediately, your executive access is revoked, and you are being placed on administrative leave pending your removal as CEO. The line went dead with a sharp beep. Julian's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor. His mother let out a shrill, hysterical sob, suddenly rushing toward me and trying to grab my hands. Clara, please. You can't let them do this to my boy. He worked so hard for that company. You loved him. You're his wife. Talk to your mother. Tell her to stop this. I calmly stepped back, out of her reach, watching her with a cool, unbothered expression. 5 minutes ago, she was mocking my humble background and celebrating my eviction. Now, she was groveling on her knees. Julian dropped to his knees right beside her, tears finally spilling down his pale face. The arrogant, untouchable tech founder had completely vanished. Clara, please, he wept, looking up at me with utter desperation. I was wrong. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean any of those things I said on the phone. I love you, Clara. We can fix this. We can start over. Just please, don't destroy everything I built. You didn't build it, Julian, I said, my voice quiet, steady, and devoid of any lingering affection. My mother built it. I protected it. And you destroyed it the moment you decided that human beings are disposable based on their net worth. I turned my back on them both, walking past the security detail toward the front door. Pack my remaining personal items, Eleanor instructed her team calmly, and file the immediate asset seizure against this property before the sun sets. As I stepped out into the crisp air and walked down the stone path, Julian's desperate cries echoed from the open doorway behind me, begging for a second chance that would never come. I didn't look back once as the security agent held the door of the lead SUV open for me, and I stepped inside, closing the chapter on the biggest mistake of my life. Within 48 hours, the news of Julian's disgraced departure from his own company hit the regional business journals. Stripped of his CEO title and facing an unsentimental, comprehensive audit from Vanguard Global, his investors scattered like dust. Unable to refinance the astronomical corporate debt or maintain his lavish lifestyle, his sports car was repossessed and the suburban mansion went straight into bank foreclosure. Last I heard, he and his mother had relocated to a small, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, where he spends his days dodging calls from collection agencies and former business associates. As for me, stepping away from that toxic marriage wasn't the end of my story. It was the actual beginning. I reclaimed my birthright, officially stepping into my role on the board of directors at Vanguard Global alongside my mother. I used my position to spearhead a new venture fund specifically dedicated to supporting quiet, humble entrepreneurs who value integrity and human connection over arrogant posturing. Sitting in my new corner office overlooking the city skyline, I often think back to that rainy afternoon when Julian put his phone on speaker. He thought he was calling my mother to destroy my dignity and discard me like trash. In reality, he was simply making the call that unlocked my freedom. Never let anyone convince you that you are disposable just because you choose to walk quietly. True power doesn't need to shout. It simply waits for the right moment to make its move.